Hello dear viewers, welcome to my channel Media Sutra. Today we are honored to have a distinguished media expert joining us, Professor Jennifer Fleming. She is a leading authority and expert in news media literacy and have studied its profound impact on social mobility. In this captivating interview, we discuss the critical importance of social mobility in shaping the fabric of our society. Her insights provide us a unique perspective on how access to information and news through media literacy can be a transformative force in creating a more equitable and inclusive world. Also explore the fascinating realm of cognitive theory of news media literacy. And Professor Jennifer Fleming shares her deep knowledge and expertise in this area, shedding light on how our cognitive processes influence the way we consume and interpret news. This conversation promises to be a journey in the heart of media literacy and its far-reaching effects on the society. So let's dive into this insightful discussion with the brilliant Professor Jennifer Fleming.
Okay. So can we start with the interview? Ma'am, so you have studied research extensively on news media literacy, covering the points of Porter's perspective, Stony Brook University's course, Seth Ashley's work on news media literacy. So how do you define news media literacy and why is it important?
Well, one of my preferred definitions of news literacy is the ability to identify, assess, examine, and appreciate journalism, high quality journalism, especially, or news media. So why is it important? Because not all information out there is the same in terms of the veracity of the information, in terms of the vetting of the facts in there. And so what are the markers of high quality journalism that are, the intent is to try to have verified truth in journalism. So there's no absolute truth a lot of the times, but there is a process. What is that process? How do you identify it? How do you examine it? And also, what types of journalism are out there? News, people associate news primarily with politics, but news is so much more than that in the United States, in Canada, my home country, and in India. People look to news or news sources, however they define it, for information about sports, information about health, information about fashion. Even the New York Times publishes recipes. So there are all sorts of things fall under the umbrella of news and journalism, not just politics, although that is an emphasis, particularly in the United States in news literacy. I would argue a highly news literate person would understand that news, is not just about politics. It's not just about left or right. It's also about it and things that people are interested in. So that's how I would define it, is some ability to identify, assess, and analyze, as well as appreciate high quality news and information sources, whether it's produced by a professional journalist or someone who is a citizen journalist.
True, ma'am. I think this pandemic has somewhere shown the importance of news literacy. Why? Because the coming up of misinformation about the health treatments, the doctors, the everything. So I think this also has showcased how important is media literacy, news literacy is.
It's information people use to make decisions, large and small. And so that needs to be, and this is coming from the Stony Brook curriculum, reliable information, not just information. On social media, we are bombarded with information everywhere. What is reliable? And can quality news sources be deemed reliable? So because information is everywhere.
Yes, ma'am, truly. And coming with the coming years, it will be there, and the information explosion will, I think, increase. It will not decrease. So the importance again comes here. Ma'am, in the changing models of citizenship, which has come due to the digital media, the shift from print to digital media, social mobility is an important factor for a vibrant society. And also research shows that the social media networks promote social and political mobility. So ma'am, how can news media literacy help to bridge a gap between social mobility and social media networks?
Oh, social mobility and so how would news literacy intersect with social media? So I'm just going to talk it out because that's an interesting angle. I would say social media in theory democratize media access. I don't know about the cell phone or smartphone and internet penetration rate in India, but I understand it's high there and it's high everywhere. So everyone has the ability to be a consumer and a producer of news content. So you have that ability to not only select what you expose yourself to, but to produce and potentially have not only a local audience, but a global audience in terms of viral. So that's I call it the democratization of digital media. So, but then again, how do you connect that with social mobility and news media literacy is that, again, what is the motivation of the person behind the media message? Is it to make money? Is it propaganda? Is it someone hiding behind that? It's still it's not a pure information ecosystem, even though millions, if not billions of people can access it now. What are the motivations? What's the quality of information? So the connection between news literacy and social mobility is to be critical news consumers and producers and active citizens. Just the sharing or posting of something, particularly in the political realm or today in the health realm or health communication realm, is an act of citizenship. Now, in terms of mobility, I hope that sort of makes the connections you're looking for. I think just the power in a smartphone and internet connectivity and the awesome penetration rate on a global scale. I don't know a lot about India, but I attended a talk at my university about how widespread cell phone penetration and internet is in India. But also there is an intersection between political propaganda given the ownership of it. I don't remember exactly. So in theory, hundreds of millions of people in India, this is just my understanding, are connected. But again, what are they being exposed to given who owns and controls? Now, that's something I don't really know about. So the potential is there, but again, all of the traditional perils of government control and censorship or big corporate control and censorship still are problems around the world. So there's not a direct connection, but I'd say there's definitely a potential between social media, digital access, and news media literacy. Just be smart about what you're doing and be aware.
Ma'am, can we link social mobility to civic empowerment, civic engagement? And news literacy is connected to civic empowerment and engagement.
People like social mobility would be you're moving up in terms of earning potential, that kind of thing. That's what you're looking for. Yeah, well, I think that the more you're aware of the information environment, the more you can use it for your own purposes. And one is to understand quality information and use it in terms of your personal and professional pursuits in the personal and professional and public spheres. The more you're informed about anything, the better chance you have of using it, I want to say, to your advantage, but using these tools for better outcomes. And one of those outcomes could be social mobility and civic engagement.
Definitely.
But for me, it's a double-edged sword because, again, you can use it for social mobility, particularly for civic engagement. But again, yeah, it's just because you don't necessarily know who is really behind the messages. And that's one thing about news and media literacy. Who is the source of this message? What is their purpose?
Yes, ma'am. It is very important to know and to be basically literate about and to critically analyze the message is very important. Ma'am, you proposed a cognitive theory of news literacy. So, ma'am, can you please elaborate on that a bit?
Oh, well, I think that was a while ago. Again, I'm just trying to think, for me, when I was developing that idea, I was looking at emphasis, right? Because the one thing I sort of said, news literacy is distinct from media literacy because not all media messages are created for the same purpose in the same methods. And particularly now with social media and the proliferation of digital media. So I tried to look at what are you trying in terms of pedagogy, trying to teach someone? What is your emphasis? What is your focus? And so I sort of broke it down because media literacy looks a lot, particularly critical media literacy, at ideology. But for cognitive theory, you're looking at the critical thinking behind the analysis of media messages and news and information in particular. And I say news and information because in theory, there is an expectation of fact-based information, of reliable information. Okay? I don't expect that in a feature film. I expect to be entertained, but in news and journalism, perhaps there's a bit of entertaining, but I really want to know what's the latest in terms of an election, in terms of the latest COVID, what's open, what's not. So I expect that to be reliable information, and I'm going to use my cognitive abilities to assess that. Whereas I'm not going to use those to analyze a feature film or a comic book or a podcast is different. So the cognitive theory is really the critical thinking behind the analysis of media messages, particularly the reliability of information that is presented as fact, whether it's in journalism or a social media post. So that was sort of what I was trying to break out from media literacy. They're like, okay, you look at media messages this way. And I'm saying, well, in terms of bringing the journalism angle in, there is an intent behind the producers of journalism that there are facts, there verified information, and it's good information based on what they know at the time. And so that's really a cognitive ability. So that was sort of my cognitive theory, is just saying, look, there's an emphasis on critical thinking in this particular area, and it has to be distinct from other media messages because they're not the same. The intent, again, I can watch a movie, I'm trying to think of just some sort of a movie about a real life event, but it's fictionalized. So I'm not going to accept that as truth, nor do I expect it. But I hope that there is, again, reliable, verified information, and I use my cognitive abilities or critical thinking to analyze news media messages. So that was where that theory came up. It was a way to just sort of disentangle what was going on in news literacy, because as an educator, I can't teach everything to everyone, particularly in college. And what is the grade level you're looking at in your research? Like, what's the age of the students?
Ma'am, it is 18 to 25 years.
Right, 18 to 25. You can't teach everything, particularly in 3 hours, 30 weeks, 3 years. You have to decide. And so it's an element of trying to inject precision into media literacy and disentangle news literacy from this general framework. And I thought the cognitive abilities were the most important, or one of the most important, hence the cognitive theory of news literacy. I'm also a big believer, if I remember that framework correctly, in the mode as well, or the medium, right? And there's a lot of great research that someone who reads about an event in a newspaper or watches the coverage, the same event on television, come away with very different perceptions of what happened. And so that's the same as someone makes sense of an event through a social media channel and a smartphone. So in my own news literacy practice, teaching practice, I try to encourage cognitive ability or critical thinking about the mode, the preferred mode of a media message. Because I don't even know what TikTok is, but I know people are getting information from TikTok. Sure. So, and I know that they're interpreting it as news and real, and they're taking action. So that's somehow intersected in there? And can we use our cognitive abilities to try to figure things out? I don't go near TikTok because I know nothing about it, but I'm reading about it because it's so big now. But people are making informed decisions based on messages made by real people, in theory, on TikTok. So that would be my idea in terms of cognitive theory. What really are we trying to develop? Critical thinking about news and information.
Ma'am, even in India is a varied country with various socio-economic and cultural backgrounds and political. And ma'am, it is a developing country. And we have so many political parties taking the shelter of fake news to manipulate the information of the voters and to rule the country. So, ma'am, I think it is very detrimental for the democracy. So that's why I took this topic of news media literacy, basically to analyze the cognitive skills. I think cognitive is a very important aspect which you covered and touched. It's really something which really needs to be focused.
I'm glad it's absolutely independent critical thinking about the content, but also their own media habits. And that's from James W. Potter in terms of, I'm the controller of my perception. I'm the controller. How can I control how and assess this information? So yeah, it's like both the content and the habits, the media habits themselves and the choices.
Yes, ma'am. Now, ma'am, what policy interventions do you propose in the digital-driven societies?
Policy is tough. I mean, I would say, because in the context here, if you add something to the curriculum, then you have to take something away. Now, in terms of banning speech, like I'm not a fan of that tag, partly because of the source who made it popular, Donald Trump. I mean, and what is it? I mean, that's ridiculous. Fake news to you is real news to me, right? So in terms of censorship, as a journalist, I'm against it. So policy to control speech is a slippery slope, in my opinion. And I want to believe that if you empower the electorate or citizens with independent critical thinking skills, the masses will shut down speech that is harmful or fake or damaging. That would be my hope, instead of an intervention. In terms of, you can't say that, well, then that's a very slippery slope. So in terms of controlling speech, now in terms of policy that supports news literacy or media literacy instruction, sure. And that's really in the United States, a local intervention, state by state, county by county, or even school board by school board. But censorship, I'm not a fan of. I know it happens. Censorship with the capital C in terms of the government coming in is it just doesn't happen a lot in the United States. I don't know about India, but corporate, like in terms of Facebook censoring and that kind of thing, it's happening a lot. Algorithms. Yeah. So maybe, and I know that's happening a lot. It's not something I follow closely, but I know that Facebook or just algorithms are a form of censorship as well. And so maybe there's that kind of indirect policy intervention. And that's because of a lot of public outcry, as well as government pressure for the corporations to control their information environment a little more. So I guess you can have policy in terms of trying to control the wild west of the information environment. And I think it's a balance. I would prefer less government censorship and transparency for corporate or Google or Facebook censorship. What's going on? Why are they being banned? Because I'm hearing some things that are being banned from YouTube and that kind of thing. And that's sort of scary to me as well. What if I want to listen to that?
Yeah. And
someone deems it, whatever. Like, again, it's a very, very slippery slope. I'm hesitant to control speech, but that's just my perspective. But there's a lot of hateful, hurtful speech out there as well. What do you do? I don't know.
Yes, ma'am. I think, ma'am, if we want to start a curriculum on news media literacy or news literacy, so ma'am, what all things shall we include, like at a college level, if we want to start? So,
well, I always start where the students are. What do they consider news? How are they getting their news? How do they define it? Right. And again, students, particularly young people, are like, well, I'm not into journalism or whatever, but they also want to be informed. So there's and really try to figure out how they make sense of it and make the connections between how they're making sense of the fast changing information environment that they're exposed to with high quality, traditional news literacy ideas, whatever the perspective you approach, as well as the history of journalism and the purpose of journalism in democracies, which I include as part of news literacy pedagogy. Why is news important? What is its role? And that's distinct depending on the country, the state, the city. But how important is a free and independent press in terms of history, and what are the markers and why is it developed that way? And let's make connections with what's going on in your information environment and those principles, and how do we analyze and look for information? So I'd always sort of start where the students are, and it's different. I mean, I don't know about in India, but here I rarely meet an 18-year-old who has held a physical newspaper. They know what it is.
Yeah.
They consume news and information, but they don't know the form anymore. And that's okay. But in terms of understanding where they're coming from, that's really important. So, and do they consider the Facebook headline, the news feed, news? And they probably do. When you have all sorts of things, so where are they, what do they consider news? And then let's try to bridge those understandings and those experience with news literacy pedagogy, as well as the history of news and journalism in that particular context. So it's a continuity. It's not, fake news is nothing new. I mean, at least in this country, you've got propaganda going back a long time. So, and it's a way almost where that sort of history gives them a better understanding that this is an ongoing debate in a democratic, free society. And it's an important debate, so that's why I always sort of start where the students are and then bridge the principles of news literacy that I incorporate, as well as the history of journalism, particularly in the United States, and how the things you see in their world on Facebook, what's the history of the byline of photojournalism and the quotes and that kind of thing. And that way they can make those connections with a tradition that goes back centuries and a modern environment.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. I think these things will really, somewhere when they'll see news somewhere, they would be able to connect with it, these things. And ma'am, when we talk about journalism, what like theories also, somewhere agenda setting theory, very basic theories, I think, where everybody individual perspective, agenda theory, then this confirmation bias and everything, which I think every student should be aware of. And we can include these things also in the curriculum when we teach.
Yes, actually, I'm glad you brought it up. I appreciate agenda setting theory. I know it's basic, but it's not incorporated a lot, but it's really important, especially if you're looking at traditional news sources and how they influence even the social media. Again, you just look, okay, what's in the New York Times? People are going to be talking about it on Twitter. It goes all over. So agenda setting, where did that come from? It came from an original journalism source, and then it reverberated across this particular information ecosystem. So I think agenda set theory is a really important one for students to understand. I'm a big fan of Marshall McLuhan in terms of understanding the mode of the medium, your preferred medium. There's one other one that I can't. Maybe is it the spiral of silence?
Yeah.
Silence even though this one particular view is not the agenda of the day, that doesn't mean it's not important. That doesn't mean no one believes in it. And so what's being said, what's being emphasized, but what's being excluded? That's the story there as well. So yeah, agenda setting theory, I use a lot in my teaching. I don't incorporate it a lot in the research, but I think it's very important particularly for college age news media literacy programs. And again, that goes to what is the age group? You're not going to teach the same thing to college age students and to 10-year-olds. Yeah. It's distinct. And you're going to talk about different topics as well. But yeah, those are the theories I like. I'm a big fan of Marshall McLuhan. I know he seems dated or his ideas, but I do believe that the way people, the form of media that they rely on the most affects their understanding and perception of the world and themselves in it. And that just goes back to, again, people who have a print, again, back to the studies of newspapers and television. People are more afraid if they watch a lot of television, particularly in the United States, than if they read something. So, and social media now, all of the research coming out about how it makes people more anxious, it makes people attention span. So there is a role in what's going on. I don't have the answer for it in news literacy. That's why I just try and I follow W. James Potter in terms of, what does he call it? You control your perception, you control your exposure. I think he calls it the personal locus.
Yeah.
And that's at the heart of my pedagogy, is you are in control of your meaning making process and your content selection. If you make something more impactful on the personal level, it's a lot more effective in the long run, in my experience.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. W.J. Potter, I have 3 objectives, and which is based on that only, which is mindful thought processing, personal locus, and developed knowledge structure.
I appreciate your approach. I think it's on the right track. I do. I like that, because again, especially in this crazy information environment, the only constant is ourselves. And that's where the primary power should come. Yes, algorithms and all of that. But in the end, I want to live in a democracy where the government's not going to ban my speech. And I'd rather have the power for myself. But it sounds exciting, your approach.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, one last question, because we are getting out of time. So, ma'am, a message for the youth who are plugged with social media messages and receiving news online. A message, ma'am. Last
message. I would say you are in control. You're in control of what you expose yourself to, and you're in control of the meaning making process and analyzing messages. And you are in control of what you put out in the world through the social media channels and other information sources you may use.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, even for when we talk about media literacy, they say that ability to create message also somewhere.
Right.
But ma'am, do that news media literacy will also consider that creating the message?
Some do in terms of pedagogy, right? Some do. Oh gosh, I reviewed an article recent, and they called it, let me take a look at it. I appreciated it. It wasn't creation. I was sort of against creation in terms of access, analyze, evaluate, create. Yeah. It's too much. Yeah. It's too much for 15 weeks. I want people to understand first themselves and their experiences with news, then what news is from professional standards. And then you just can't create news like that. But that's just basic. But let me take a look. I just reviewed an article, and they used something that I appreciated. It was, instead of create, just a sec. Okay. And they used something where it was a framework. Okay. They called it corrective action. And they used, and I thought that was really interesting. So it wasn't create, it was an action. And you've got to think about it on a social media, or I'm not even on Twitter, but an action could be sharing. Instead of creating, I'm sharing. And so the frame, they used some sort of framework. I don't know if it's going to be published or not, but they had something for need for cognition. And then they used fake news literacy. I didn't like fake news. And then a corrective action. So if you see fake news, instead of passing along, call it out. That's your corrective action. That's citizen engagement. So there are a lot of things happening. I'm like, I appreciate that more than creation in this context. And that goes to responsibility. I'm not a big fan of creation. I think it's too much for a 15-week course or a 3-hour module. But creation, you do have a better understanding of a process and how hard things are if you do attempt to create it. But again, in terms of a course, what do you emphasize? And that's why I sort of came up with the cognitive theory. What's your emphasis? And do that well. And recognize there are other approaches. I was just not a big fan of creation. But corrective action, I like.
Yes, ma'am. Truly, I also feel that creative, because somewhere you need to analyze whether this news should be shared or not further, because there are so many forwards.
Right.
So, ma'am, this is also somewhere important. I think, ma'am, will go on and on, because this discussion is so interesting and engaging. And, ma'am, thank you so much. I'm really very happy to have this engaging session with you. It was so interesting. So, ma'am, I hope we'll be in touch in future also. And yeah, so ma'am, I'll definitely share thesis and everything with you.
Definitely. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. And yeah, you've got some great ideas going. So I'm looking forward to some final results. You send it to me.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
As we wrap up this enlightening conversation with Professor Jennifer Fleming, we extend our sincere thanks for joining us today. We have explored the intricate connection with news media literacy and social mobility, gaining valuable insights into their role in shaping a fairer and more informed society. Professor Fleming's expertise has provided us with deeper understanding of some pertinent subjects. If you are passionate about news media literacy and quest for greater social mobility, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Stay connected with us for more engaging conversations and experts' insights. Thank you once again for being a part of this enriching conversation. And until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay connected. Thank you.